Thank you, Sir Doris and Sir May for today's Sunday Pūjā chanting. Back with us this week, we have Brother Ghatikara Loo to share on Mahapadana Sutta, Buddha Vipassi Part 3. Over to you, Brother Loo.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brother Terence. And a very good morning, brothers and sisters in the Dhamma. I'm very happy, that I'm able to again, discuss and share the Dhamma with everyone this morning. So before we begin with today's Dhamma discussion and sharing, let us first of all put our palms together in Anjali, and pay our highest and deepest homage and respect to the Buddha, the Blessed One, whom through his great effort and sacrifice, he has rediscovered the path to liberation, and that has enabled us to practice the true Dhamma. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, and again, a very good morning, everyone. So for the Dhamma discussion this morning, I'm actually going to continue, with what I actually left off the last time round, and we were actually discussing, on this particular sutta that was actually extracted, from the Digha Nikaya, which is a compilation of the discourses, delivered by the Blessed One, and this is actually from the long discourses, of the Buddha. And this is extracted from DN 14, and the title of this sutta is Mahapadana Sutta. And this is a very interesting sutta, because it actually records and recounts, the life, of Vipassi Buddha, and it also underscores, and demonstrates, the remarkable psychic power, of our Gautama Buddha, and if you can recall, the sequence of what's been recounted in this sutta, there was this conversation, that took place between the Blessed One, and the monks, and the monks were very, very curious, um, about, they were discussing about past lives, and very naturally, they asked the Buddha, to about past lives, and of course the Buddha then gave this very interesting sutta, and he actually recounted the past lives of, the Buddhas, that had actually arisen, in various aeons, as you know, aeon, is actually a very long time. It actually is a time period, um, like the sutta, actually describes, the time taken, for uh, 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 the time taken where you actually take a kasi cloth, a dewar, and it actually wipes the mountain, of 7 yojanas, in all respects in measurements of this mountain, and the time taken to actually totally obliterate this mountain, to completely wipe it off, and the time is actually more than that. And that actually itself is an aeon, and I believe that itself is the time, taken, where a universe actually goes through a full cycle, from origination, to sustenance, and to, down to, where it actually disintegrates. So that itself is actually a world cycle, right? And the Buddha actually recounted, that this Buddha Vipassi had actually arisen, in the Buddha says that 91 aeons ago, this is actually how long it was. And the Buddha was able to recount, the life of the Buddha down to the minutest details. If you can actually read this sutta, it's actually quite remarkable and quite amazing. The Buddha could actually tell the monks, and in actually very vivid details, and the life, that Buddha Vipassi actually underwent, from the time that, Buddha Vipassi was actually in Tusita heaven, how he then descended from Tusita heaven, down to the human realm, and and the specific events, that happened, when the Bodhisattva was born. Remember, if you can recall, how the Buddha Gautama actually described, he was actually received, by the devas, before by the humans, and there was actually then, waters, from the heavens, and from the devas to receive him. and how he actually walked 7 steps, and then pointing towards the sky, that this will be his last birth, and the proclamation that he would actually attain a Sama Sambuddha, that would actually be his last life, in samsara, So and of course, where I left off the last time around was that his father actually then brought him to the ascetics, to have his fortune told. Remember, and and the ascetics, then actually gave 2 ultimatums to the king. Remember, that if this bodhisattva, remained, as in the at home, and he did not actually go forth, then he'll become, a universal monarch, a great king, and and if he renounces the world and becomes an ascetic, then the bodhisattva, will become a great a great being, a fully enlightened being, a Sama Sambuddha, who actually turn the wheel of truth, and who actually expound, on this profound Dhamma to the world, to the world, the Devas and the Brahmas, and all with all these beings in this all the realms of existence. So then of course his father, this Vipassi Buddha, of course, when he was born, he was Bodhisattva, and the Bodhisattva's father become rather worried, right? So I really hope that my son will continue my heritage, will actually ascend to the throne, and I will do whatever I can to make sure that he remains in the kingdom, and he actually then takes over my kingship. I'll do all ways possible so that he doesn't renounce the world. And in the sutta, I recall, that he actually, the king actually had 3 palaces built for this bodhisattva, and one for each season, and of course, he actually made sure that the bodhisattva was immersed, in the 5 courts of sensual pleasure, with all the musicians and the courtesans and all the dancers, and all females. None of them were males, all females, to make sure that he was drowned, in this and mesmerized, by all this sensual pleasure, so that he won't think about renunciation, So so I think in that respect, it's actually very much the same as all the what Gautama Buddha, actually went through when he was a bodhisattva, and he actually underwent the same events as well. That he was actually made to to drown in all this sensual pleasure, so that all these thoughts of suffering and ultimate truth, and about conditioned phenomena, about all this sankhara dukkha, all this will not surface in his mind, um, so I think that's where we actually left off, the last time around. So let's continue now, with this Buddha Vipassi, which is actually very interesting if you look at it, that the Buddha could actually recount down to the very, very detailed, very detailed recount, of what Buddha Vipassi actually went through, So before I continue, let me just share my screen so that, we could actually follow the suttas as well. Okay, this is actually where I left off the last time around. Let me see if I could just reposition this. Okay, so remember, and of course, when the baby bodhisattva was actually brought to these ascetics, um, and um, and remember, they actually observe that this bodhisattva actually had the 32 marks of a great man, and this is actually very, very something that's actually it's like a nature's law, like if you actually see this person have this 32 marks, you know that this is actually a very spiritually developed person, and and these are the marks, that are actually that are the epitome, of a great spiritual being, that somebody who's actually going to actually achieve, momentous spiritual developments, in the spiritual realm, So at that time, when the baby bodhisattva was actually brought, to this ascetics, so then, they actually made these observations that, this bodhisattva, had these very distinctive marks, the 32 marks of a great man, And I think in the last Dhamma discussion, I actually, in a way, elaborated on some of these 32 marks, which I shall not uh, elaborate. I mean, which I shall not go through again. As you can see, the Bodhisattva, in terms of physique wise, he's very well built, and his voice, his eyes, all these are actually manifestations of the great wholesome deeds, that Bodhisattva has performed in the past, and all these actually culminate, towards, how, he's actually being, his nama rupa, right? How he actually, it actually translates, from the great wholesome deeds that he has done. I can see from his physical features as well as various aspects of his features. Very towering. And very very magnificent, features that, this 32 marks, that you can see here, and of course, I also mentioned about the crown of his like a turban. Remember, that, if you look at the Buddha's head, in some of the images, especially the Thai images, it's shown that the Buddha actually has got this sharp pointed end towards the head. So it actually comes from these 32 marks as well, that it shows, great, remarkable wisdom, the magnificent wisdom that the Buddha possesses, that actually, he's able to develop because, of his spiritual development. He has actually penetrated the truth, and he has attained Sammasambuddhahood, and he's able to see through, the intrinsic nature of conditioned phenomena, and all that he needs to know, that he's able to eradicate, all the defilements, ignorance, able to actually unshackle himself, some samsara, and his great wisdom, and that's why the crown is like a turban, so naturally in Buddha images, you see, the top is the Buddha's head is actually very sharp and pointy. So if you see anybody with this feature, with this sharp pointy head, that shows that this person is very intelligent as well, um, uh, so that is actually 32 marks of the great man. So that's where I left off, uh, and of course, the next part, the sutta actually also recounts, how, this baby Bodhisattva, this Prince Vipassi, the Bodhisattva, was actually being nurtured, being well taken care of, with a lot of love and tender care. He was actually being carried and very from person to person. Everybody loved him. He was actually somebody who was actually very lovable, and he was very well protected wherever he went. There will be white parasols, held over him. Uh, um, and here it says that he was actually dear and beloved by many people, like a blue water lily, like a or a pink or white lotus, and he was always passed from hip to hip. That shows that everybody loved him immensely, and from when he was born, it is Bodhisattva. His voice was charming, graceful, sweet, and lovely. And the Sutta says that his voice was like as sweet as like a cuckoo bird, found in the Himalayas. So can you imagine, like very very sonorous voice, like like the Bodhisattva had, because of all the past good deeds that and the wholesome actions and deeds that he had actually performed, and all these, all manifested, in these features, the nama rupa that he has, quite wonderful, and and of course, this Bodhisattva, had actually the power of clairvoyance. Means he actually psychic power, which manifested as a result of past deeds that he did, where he could actually see for a league all around by him by day and by night. A league is about 7 kilometers. Can you imagine? He could actually see something as far as 7 kilometers. Can you imagine? That is actually quite wondrous, right? And of course, quite incredible. I mean, for us, we can't even see anything sometimes so near, in front of us when you're driving, you can't even see, and that is like it's 7 kilometers, you know. Um, and and he was very watchful, he was very mindful, like the gods of the 33, means the gods of Tavatimsa, and because of that, it was said he was unblinkingly watchful. It means he was always constantly very mindful, always watching, That's why he's called Vipassi. V is like seeing from many aspects. Vipassi is like seeing, right? Pasana, Pasi from the Pali word pasana is like seeing. So it's like seeing, in many ways. So it's like always, he was always constantly very mindful, of his surroundings, of his sixth sense basis, what sense context come into him. He was always very watchful. That's why he's called Vipassi, Buddha Vipassi. Uh, and the Buddha also the Buddha in this sutta also actually talks about how this Prince Vipassi he would actually accompany his father whenever his father was presiding over cases. Remember, like a king, he would preside over cases. When his uh, yeah, when there were cases presented before the king, and there were deliberations on certain cases, so this Prince Vipassi will actually sit on the king's lap, and the king, will actually in a way also explain the case to the prince, and as a young child, sitting on the father's lap, this Prince Vipassi, would actually contemplate, and ruminate on the case, and assess for himself. He'll evaluate the case, and then he would draw a conclusion using a logical procedure, and and he would tell his father, what his thoughts about the case, and it's quite amazing, right? Even as a young child, he was actually he possessed this intelligence and the wisdom, even at the worldly level, not even a spiritual realm, but even at the worldly level, he was actually able to preside over cases, that his father actually set as a judge, to decide, on cases that were brought before the king, and this was all the reason more for him to be known as Vipassi, uh, and like I mentioned, this king was always had this worry, hanging over him, that he was worried that the prince one day would actually renounce, and leave the kingdom. So the king actually had three stilt long houses built for him, one for winter, one for summer, and one for rainy season. Um, and provided him with the fine kinds of sensual stimulations. Um, and and the prince, stayed in this still long house without coming downstairs for 4 months for the rainy season, where he was entertained by the musicians, and none of them were men, like I mentioned before, And next, the Buddha then went to the next chapter, in this Prince Vipassi, the Bodhisattva's life, Then, the sutta continues by saying, then after many years, many hundreds and years, many thousands years had passed. Remember, during this Buddha Vipassi's time, the average human life is actually 80,000 years. Can you imagine? Because, of the great um, uh, morality, that people actually followed at that time. During that time, people were actually more morally upright. They were not capable of actually performing any of the 10 ducharitas, like I mentioned, the 3, 4, 3, remember? 3 by body, 4 by speech, and 3 by mind. So because of that, the human lifespan then, was actually much longer. Um, you know, and um, and after many thousands years had passed, right, then the Bodhisattva, addressed his charioteer, and he said, my dear charioteer, harness the finest chariots and we'll go to the park and see the scenery, And he actually asked the charioteer that he wanted to just go out because perhaps he was actually quite bored, no, and with the life in the palace, where he kept seeing the dancers, and all this sensual pleasure, and perhaps he found it rather um bored, or rather uh like a bit blasé about it, like I just wanted to go out and just have a look. So he asked the charioteer, and so harness, the chariot, I shall go to the park, and see the scenery. Um, and of course, the charioteer agreed, and complied. And he harnessed the chariot, informed the prince, sire, the everything is ready, and we could go at your convenience, And of course, the prince then mounted, a fine carriage, along with others, and set out, for the park, he just wanted to just go out and just see, the world outside, And along the way, he actually saw an elderly man, bent double, crooked, leaning on the staff, trembling as he walked, um, ailing and past his prime. And then the Bodhisattva became rather curious, and rather, um, and was a bit puzzled, because he never seen this before, He said, my dear charioteer, what has this man done, that actually to deserve this, to deserve this condition, for this, for his hair and his body are like those of other men. Please, just do bear in mind that the Bodhisattva had never seen an old man before, in his life, and he was actually caged, in like a mouse trap, where he was only presented with pleasant people, good looking, beautiful, maids, dancers, with all the sensual pleasure. He never seen an old man before, so it was like a rude shock to him, that he suddenly saw somebody who was like with a wrinkled skin, with white hair, and hunched, crooked, and they were like, trembling feet, having to use, a walking stick, and to walk. So it was like came as a rude shock to him that that he was like suddenly he couldn't actually fathom and understand what this phenomenon was all about. Then the charioteer actually had to explain to him. He said, Your Majesty, this is called an old man, And then this Prince Vipassi, the Bodhisattva, then asked, why is he called an old man? And the charioteer says, oh, he's called an old man, because he has not long to live. That means somebody who's actually towards the end of one's lifespan, on the verge of reaching the end of life. So that's why the person is called an old man. And he was like quite taken aback, and he was a bit shaken as well. He said, uh, oh, if that's the case, my dear character, am I liable to grow old? Am I not exempt from old age? He's like, if that happens to this person, then does it mean that I'm also liable to grow old? I'm also subject to growing old. He was, for a moment, he got this sort of like spiritual urge suddenly arise in him. Then does it mean that I'm also going to go through the same path as well? Then this character says, everybody, is liable to grow old, Your Majesty, including you. Nobody's exempt from old age. Then he was like a bit shaken, and like depressed, and suddenly he thought life was like a bit of roses, like a cruiser, that you could just enjoy yourself, but apparently it's not. We are all uh, maneuvering ourselves towards the end, of that path. That's how it's life is like. And then and it just like suddenly dawned upon him. Say, oh well, I'm also going to grow old one day. So what is all this sensual enjoyment for? Seriously, honestly, what is this all? It's meaningless. It's so transient, right? And well, then he told the charioteer, my dear charioteer, that's enough for the day. Let's return to the royal compound. And the charioteer said, yes, Your Majesty. And they complied. Then back at the royal palace, the prince brooded. That means he was like in deep thoughts. Contemplative, brooded, and became miserable and sad. Like really, his trip was really not enjoyable at all. And in fact, he was really miserable and depressed, because suddenly, he was confronted with the truth of life, the truth of nature, that it's not just all hunky dory and not just everything is rosy, where everybody's always healthy and good looking. There'll come a time, where everything will then degrade and degenerate. That's how it is. That's how life is. And the prince, in his heart, he was thinking, curse this thing called birth or rebirth. Since old age will come to anyone who's born. Curse this birth, because of you birth, that's why there's old age. So whoever who is born, the final destiny is always old age. You can't run away. It's like you're starting the journey towards old age. So what is there to be happy about birth? So then this King Baduma, summoned the charioteer and asked, my dear charioteer, um, I hope the prince enjoyed himself at the park. I hope he was happy. Then this charioteer said, no, this is what you think. It's not. No, Your Majesty, the prince didn't enjoy himself at the park at all. And the king, was then he became rather concerned. He said, but what did the prince see on the way to the park? And the charioteer told the king exactly what actually happened. He actually saw this old man, hunched, crooked, with hunchback, with wrinkled skin and really, really old, with white hair, rickety and shaky, on a stick, and also he described to the king, the prince's reaction, that became really sad and depressed, because he was finally confronted with the truth of life, you know. And the sutta then continues. This is the first scene, and then the second, the sutta then continues. Then this king Banduma, this the Bodhisattva's father, King Banduma, then started thinking, this Prince Vipassi must not renounce the throne. I must make sure at all costs that he does the thought of going forth, and renunciation does not germinate in him. And make sure that none of this will actually arouse any thoughts of renunciation in him, and he must not go forth, from the lay life to homelessness. I must make sure that this doesn't happen. And the words of the Brahmin soothsayers must not come true, So to this end, he doubled up his effort, and provided the prince of it even more of the pleasure, wow, that means double up, make sure that previously maybe they were like hundred of dancers and courtesans and all these maids. Now I'll make sure there's thousands. I'll put them and try to make sure that he's drowned in this sensual pleasure. And make sure that the prince will amuse himself, with this increase, and elevated sensual stimulation, the five causes of sensual pleasure, then the king double up the effort, and put in more resources to make sure that he continues to be drowned and immersed, so that he doesn't renounce the world. Then, after many thousands of years have passed, can you imagine? Thousands of years have passed, and the prince, went through all this sensual pleasure every day, and somehow this thought, somehow got submerged, in his subconscious, and he just enjoyed for many thousands of years. But suddenly, after many thousands of years, this bodhisattva, somehow, it will come back to you. This is because this is the merits that you have done, and this is how you are. This is how you are meant to be. It's somehow you come back and look for you. Like someone actually asked, so what happens if you are Buddhist and you are Sotapanna, for example, and then if you are reborn, in the Deva realm or the human realm, how do you know that you remember what you have cultivated before? So my answer is it will come back to you, somehow or rather. It's either you will actually stumble upon it or it will come back to you, one way or another, because that's how the karmic forces, energies work. Somehow the jigsaw puzzle will just fall into place, and then somehow it will make sure that you are reconnected with the Dhamma. So that's the wonderful uh the wonderful, remarkable thing about Dhamma. So if you practice it, you create the kind of the causes and conditions for things to actually then assemble, and so that you come back to you again. So that's what wonderful about the practice of a Dhamma. So you see, even this Bodhisattva Vipassi, after seeing the old man, the king actually provided double up the sensual pleasure to the prince Vipassi, and he actually enjoyed himself for thousands of years. But eventually it would still, the causes and conditions would still surface, and emerge, and he would still need to see, the the intrinsic nature of human suffering again. Somehow, it will come back to you. And so this Prince Vipassi again, asked his charioteer, and somehow suddenly he just had this urge, this desire, this wish, to go to the park again, and uh um you see, and then of course the Prince Vipassi asked the charioteer to drive him to the park once more, and of course the charioteer complied lah. And along the way again, this time round, he saw a man who was sick. This time round, he saw a sick man suffering gravely ill, collapse, in his own urine and feces, being picked up by some and put down by others. And somebody was like wallowing in his own urine and feces because this person was sick and nobody actually cared for him. He was just like abandoned by the road, having to care for himself. Nobody actually would care for him. He actually had to suffer, by himself. He was gravely ill, beset by diseases, and he was like wallowing in his own urine and feces, and and the prince was actually very deeply shocked by this what he saw, and he asked the charioteer, my dear charioteer, what has this man done, for his eyes and his voice are unlike those of other men, you can see that his voice were all maybe all bulging eyes, because of the diseases and suffering, and his voice were perhaps, like coarse voice, suffering. Perhaps he was actually begging, for people to care for him, or perhaps asking for money so that he could cure himself. But so the Bodhisattva actually observed that this man, who was gravely ill, was entirely different, from the healthy, good-looking, the charming chambermaids that he's used to see, all dressed up, beautiful with perfumes, with glittering jewelries, and playing the flute, the drums, wow, everything was so nice, right? And suddenly, he was from the Deva realm, he was brought down to the hell, right? Where he could see, the actual suffering of somebody who was really ill, you know, and the charioteer had to explain to this bodhisattva, this majesty is called a sick man. Then again, he was really taken aback, was really shocked, in like he couldn't actually come to terms with this what he saw, he said, then why is he called a sick man? Really taken aback, surprised and shocked to see such a thing that actually that such um, a phenomenon actually existed in the world, that he never had seen before, and the charioteer said he's called a sick man, because he's called a sick man because hopefully he'll recover from that illness, um, he's called a sick man, and hopefully he'll recover from the illness. So that's what all these sick people will actually hope, right? I hope to recover from this illness. That's why you're called the person is called a sick man. And my dear charioteer, am I also liable to fall sick? So he starts to actually contemplate, if this can happen to this person, surely, I'm also a human just like him, and also a mortal just like him. Surely, if this is this can happen to this man, this sick man, am I liable to fall sick? Am I not exempted from sickness? This is actually what he thought before, that everything, was fine, everybody was healthy, everybody was well taken care of, there was no such thing as sickness, because you must remember, the king actually surrounded him only, with sensual pleasure, means, with all the good looking chambermaids, all females, none of them were males, and everybody had to be um, good looking and charming, and everything had to be so entertaining, that nobody the prince shouldn't see anything that shows any sign of degeneration. Everything has to be really fine, So that is what the king, had accustomed him to seeing every day. So you must understand, that the moment he saw this sick man, it was like it's like a rude awakening to him, like a like a wake up call, Then suddenly, he said, am I also liable to fall sick? Then, then this the charioteer says, everybody is liable to fall sick, Your Majesty, including you. No one's exempt from sickness. Well, then, my dear charioteer, that's enough for the day. Let's return to the compound. And again, at the compound, the prince become rather miserable, and he started contemplating, started uh, started analyzing, and started, investigating about, the life that he has, then then suddenly, he thinks, curse this thing called birth, since old age and sickness originate from birth, it's because of this birth, that's why I actually have to go through sickness and old age. If there was not birth, then I didn't have to go through this old age and sickness. But first, this birth, that's why, because of birth, that's why that's why I have to go through this degeneration, like what the Buddha calls a Sankara Dukkha, or Viparinama Dukkha. Viparinama means um anything that actually originates and come into place through causes and conditions must deteriorate, That's actually what we call, viparinama dukkha. And why is it viparinama dukkha? Because it's sankhara dukkha, because it's sankhara. Sankhara because what? Because, it is actually, it originates through causes and conditions. It is actually conditionally arisen. That's why whatever that originates comes into place through causes and conditions, and it is subject ultimately and invariably and most definitely it has to degenerate. That's why there is this viparinama dukkha, because it's sankhara dukkha, because we are all conditioned. That's why um that's why this bodhisattva started thinking that really our this birth itself is actually a lot of suffering because of this origin of this arising of this origination. That's why we have all this degeneration of the sankhara. Everything itself it's subject to degeneration. Everything must deteriorate. It will sustain for a while, but it is always a constant flux. Everything changes because the causes and conditions change. That's why whatever that actually are the causes and conditions that form the sankhara. So the sankhara itself must also degenerate because the constituent causes and conditions, they also are subject to changes as well. That's why the Buddha says it is actually ultimately all empty. This sunyata, it's very it's empty. That's why this understanding of this anatta, this non-self, is actually the crown jewel of the Buddha's teaching. So it is something that's very important that you must realize in order for you even to become a sotapanna, a sotapatti, to attain sotapatti fruition, right? To become a sotapanna, this is the very first thing you must penetrate. In order for you to see the 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 ultimate reality, of phenomena, the conditioned phenomena, you must able to see how conditioned phenomena arise through causes and conditions, and that's where you can actually see, the ultimate truth, which is emptiness. That's why you see for this Prince Vipassi, this is how he actually started, because he saw, old age and sickness, and he began to see the degeneration truth, the how um conditioned phenomena, like something that's conditioned through causes and conditions, it must ultimately degenerate, because it's all conditionally arisen. There's actually nothing, no permanent substantive self that you can actually call a self. That's why it's actually called non-self. It arises through causes and conditions, and that's why it's all dependently or arisen, through causes and conditions. That's why ultimately, it is all empty, and there's nothing worth grasping to. That's where, when you are able to see that reality, and are able to penetrate the truth, that's where the eye of the Dhamma, will arise in you, and that's where you can see the light of the Dhamma, and that's where Sotapatti, suddenly just arises, and that's where the Dhamma eye then also surfaces in the Sotapanna. So you see that these are like the seeds of the the truth starting to germinate, in this Prince Vipassi, when he saw this um old age sickness, and of course you must be somebody spiritually developed in order for you to contemplate this. Otherwise, if you're just like any um putujanas, or and somebody who is actually not well spiritually developed, you just see an old person, see and see a sick person, so what, I mean, it won't arise in you, to even think, at such deep levels, and if you're not spiritually developed, you won't contemplate in such manner, about why does all this happen. Oh, the culprit is actually birth. That's how it arises, and it arises, and of course, how does birth happen, and that's where the paticca samuppada happens, right? When you actually start to see how, it's all interlinked and interrelated, and of course that comes after that, how the Prince Vipassi starts to actually contemplate about, the links, the paticca samuppada, how you know how they're all interrelated, but you can see the seed starting to germinate in him, and that's why I say curse this thing called rebirth, and because of birth, I have to go through this old age and sickness, and it will come to anyone who's born, and this he actually realized this, and King Paduma again, summoned the charioteer and asked, my dear charioteer, I hope the prince enjoyed him at the park. I hope he was happy. Then the charioteer again told him, the king, no, I don't think so. Your Majesty, the prince didn't enjoy himself at the park, and he actually then recounted to the king what happened, to the prince Bodhisatta, and the character told the king about that the prince Bodhisatta actually saw this sick man, and how the prince reacted to this, to what he saw, and what he witnessed, and the sutta continues, by saying that this, by also recounting that this king again repeated, his resolve, to make sure that that he continues to cage the prince Vipassi, in the palace, and again, he provided the prince with even more, all the five courts of sensual pleasure, which the prince amused himself day and night, again, try to drown and immerse him, with a lot of sensual pleasure, with a lot of this chambermaids, playing instruments and dancing before him, with nice food, five courts, like any human being can actually enjoy, or the devas can enjoy the five courts, in all your five sense pleasure, you're open to all these sense enjoyment, and again, after many thousands of years, the Prince Vipassi, somehow the seed starts to germinate more and more, and starts to actually germinate, and this prince again asked the character, please drive me to the park, and and this time around, when he reached the park, he saw a large crowd, gathering, making a beer out of garments of different colors. If you check the dictionary, a beer is like a structure for the coffin, to actually carry the coffin, you must actually have a structure, and that structure is actually called a beer. I also didn't know. I checked the dictionary, the beer is actually like a structure to carry a coffin. Then he addressed the charioteer, he said, my charioteer, why is that crowd making a beer, why are they making a wooden structure to carry a coffin, So that, your majesty, is for someone who's actually departed, somebody who's dead, well then, drive the chariot up to the departed. I want to see, the dead man, drive nearer there. I want to see the dead man, So the charioteer complied, all right, he's the prince. So when the prince saw the corpse of the departed, he addressed the charioteer, but why is he called dead? Why do you call this a dead person, Like suddenly, like really shocked, I mean, the sick man was bad enough, This now he saw somebody who was like totally lifeless, like probably like maybe bluish in color, and last time they had no chemicals to hold the body for many days. Can you imagine all like turning bluish or brown or blackish or what, I don't know, But this corpse was like really was already dead, and the prince saw the corpse for the first time. And he asked the charioteer, why is he called dead? Oh, he's called dead because now his father and mother, his relatives and kins will see him no more, and he will never see them again. It's like you have actually passed away, from this world. You have departed, and your parents, your relatives will see him no more, and he will also not see them anymore. That's like the last um the last chapter. I mean, that's the final departure, uh and of course the prince was like totally shocked, and he said, my dear charioteer, if that's the case, I'm also like him, like I'm also a human like him. Am I liable to die? Am I not exempt from death? Will the king and queen and my other relatives see me no more, and I shall never see them again? Then the charter says, everybody is liable to die, Your Majesty, including you. No one's exempt from death. The king and queen and your other relatives and kin shall see you no more, if you die. And you shall also never see them again, That's the last goodbye, And then my character, the prince Bodhisatta um was truly, in deep shock, this time around, he from old man and sick man, now he could actually see a dead man. It's like, it's really something that he could not accept, like I've never seen this, all this while, I had all this sensual pleasure, my five senses were always, always were confronted with sense objects that were pleasant, that were really agreeable, with palatable, and I enjoyed so much with all the laughter, and now suddenly I saw for myself, how the how life it actually intrinsically is, I've actually been shrouded away by all this because of the veil that has been put before me by my father, that I'm not able to see all this. real underlying, true nature of existence, and suddenly, he just dawned upon him that, okay, this is actually how life is going to be, so I've been tricked all this while, by this five cause of sensual pleasure, I've been living in a mouse trap, very much like the Devas, if you're actually born in the Deva realm, you're actually living in a mouse trap. Because day after day, what you see, glittering mansions made of crystals, with all the names, the Deva and the Devis surrounding you day after day, asking you, hey, today where shall we go to enjoy ourselves? Shall we go to the garden? Uh, Nandana Garden, to actually enjoy ourselves, amuse ourselves, where we see all the nice, the heavenly flowers, and I could play the flute to you, and day after night we enjoy ourselves with all the Dewa food, we don't have to work at all, every day. Can you imagine you live like that day after day, for 9 million years, in the Tawa Timsa heaven, 9 million years you live there like that, it's even better than take like, as a human, I mean, you may be actually like taking block leave, maybe for a month to enjoy yourself, but this day was 9 million years, you enjoy yourself day after day, so it's like you're living in a mouse trap and you fail to see about the true underlying nature of life, this is what uh, you know, what the suttas always say, Mara is like trying to put this veil towards you so that you're always thinking about enjoying yourself, about sensual pleasure and all this. But it takes the Buddha to point to you, that actually this is not like that, You actually have to lift that veil and see for yourself. Actually, intrinsically, life is not like that. The underlying truth is not like that, So that's why, this um king, was really upset, and really depressed, So then he told the charioteer, "That's enough, for the day. Let's return to the compound." And the same thing happened, that he became very miserable, and say, "Curse this thing called birth. It's because of you, birth, that I have that we all have to experience old age, sickness, and death, and no one is exempt from it. As long as you're born, ultimately and inevitably and invariably, you have to go through this. That is life, and this is actually what we call the sankhara dukkha, Once, everything, once something arises, and um, it is actually comes together, is formed through causes and conditions, ultimately, it must actually degenerate, degenerate. That's why we call Viparinama Sutta. It must deteriorate, because the causes and conditions are always in a state of flux, and everything changes. And because of this, the sankhara itself is also subject to change. So nothing is ever permanent. Everything is empty, ultimately. That's why the Buddha always asks us to contemplate what? Emptiness, sunyata. The Buddha says, if you can contemplate this emptiness, it is the meditation of a great man, you know. And even like, for example, if you read the suttas, I remember in one of the suttas in Majjhima Nikaya where the Buddha actually tells the monks, when the monks are on Pindabat, they must always watch their mind to make sure to check whether any loba, dosa, moha arises in the mind or not. It's like you are always um, uh, contemplating your mind. Oh, you're always contemplating, whether there's any loba, dosa, moha arise in your mind, and you must then contemplate, that this, how this arises through causes and conditions, and how it's empty, and for you to quickly, uproot this defilements in your mind. For example, if somebody offers you something that you don't like, for example, you don't like certain food, and somebody offers it to you, and you don't like it, and immediately aversion happens, right? Then you must actually observe your mind. Oh, the chitta nupassana, it's like you must actually contemplate, this is a reason. And because of this, then, you would actually, then you are supposed to immediately contemplate that this aversion and this hatred or dislike is actually conditionally arisen, and how it's actually empty, so that, you then are able to go back to this uh, balance, and uh, this position, uh, you're able to uproot, the loba, dosa, moha, and you become in a position of equipoise again. Then you become calm, again. So that is actually what the Buddha encourages. In fact, not encourages. The Buddha tells the monks you have to contemplate this way, and that's actually the emptiness, of the contemplation of emptiness. Um, so the Buddha, the prince, this Vipassi, the Bodhisattva, he started to understand, how like the birth itself is actually the root cause, the culprit, that actually the reason why we have to go through so much suffering is because of what? It's because of birth. This birth itself, that is actually the 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 real culprit behind it, the kingpin behind it, that we all have to go through this viparinama dukkha, um, uh, he and he really cursed this thing called birth, And this again, the King Banduma then again asked the charioteer, oh, I hope the prince enjoy himself, and of course the same conversations happens, no, 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 the king didn't enjoy, he saw a dead man, how do you expect him to enjoy himself, and the seed of this renunciation started to germinate more and more, you can see the root started to take firm hold, uh, and the sutta continues, after this, the King Paduma, again, um, double up or maybe triple up his effort, and provided him with more cause of sensual pleasure so that the prince will amuse himself, with all the chambermaids and the courtesans and the instruments, and the playing and the super delicious food, and drinks, So day in, day out, he listened to all the musical instruments, maybe the sitar, the flute and all this, So nice music, nice enjoyment. So for a while, he actually got drowned, in this sensual pleasure again. But after many thousands of years pass, you see, somehow the karmic energy will come back to you again, somehow or some other, But you must possess that karmic energy, and it will come back to you, somehow, or you may actually somehow gravitate towards that direction, it's very somehow very amazing, but it's actually an energy, So after many thousands of years, Prince Vipassi, again asked his charioteer, please drive me to the park once more, So and of course, charioteer complied lah. And along the way, this time around, the Prince Bodhisattva saw a man, a renunciant, with shaven head, wearing an ochre robe, He addressed this charioteer, my charioteer, what has this man done? For his head and his clothes are unlike of other men, because he saw that this renunciant, this ascetic, that he was actually like his head was shaven, he was actually wearing only ochre robes, remember, like a monk's robe. Ochre is like, like a bit dark brownish color, ochre robe, like perhaps very composed, uh, walking, and perhaps, like maybe seeking alms, and he was very curious. What do you call this man? Because he's actually very different from others, and the charioteer said, Your Majesty, that is actually called a renunciant, an ascetic, somebody who has renounced the worldly life and gone forth into the homeless life, And why is he called a renunciant? Oh, he's called a renunciant because he celebrates principle and fair conduct. He actually emphasizes principle and fair conduct means must be morally upright. And he emphasizes skillful actions, wholesome deeds, harmlessness, and he possesses sympathy for living creatures. Means he always has this loving kindness, always has this sympathy for living creatures. Always espouses harmlessness towards all beings, whether humans or whether animals. Harmlessness towards all creatures, with no discrimination and no distinction. Everybody, he actually radiates loving kindness, to all beings, and always espouses harmlessness, and emphasizes, always ensures skillful actions and good deeds, and always is morally upright. Principle and fair conduct, is what he actually holds on, as very important. Then the Prince Vipassi Buddha is this Prince Vipassi Bodhisattva suddenly it's like a light bulb suddenly lights up in him, So then I celebrate one that's called a renunciant, who celebrates principle and fair conduct, skillful actions, good deeds, harmlessness, sympathy for living creatures. Well then, drive the chariot up to the renunciant, um And the charioteer said, "Yes, your majesty," replied the charioteer, and did so, So this Prince Vipassi, this Prince Bodhisatta, said to the renunciant, he said to this ascetic, um, "My good man, what have you done, for your head and your clothes are unlike of other men." He actually asked the renunciant, said, "Sire, I'm actually I'm what is called a renunciant, an ascetic, But why are you called a renunciant? I'm called a renunciant because I value principle and fair conduct, skillful actions, wholesome deeds, harmlessness and sympathy and loving kindness, for living creatures. Then this Prince Bodhisatta says, "Then I celebrate the one called a renunciant, who values principle and fair conduct, also values wholesome deeds and good deeds, harmlessness and sympathy and loving kindness for the living creatures." So we can see from here from the sutta, we can see that this Prince Bodhisatta, had actually witnessed and seen for himself, the four um, the four momentous scenes, that had actually shaped, his resolve to renounce, and become a renunciant. Firstly, of course, it starts with the old man, then the sick man, then the dead man, and then the renunciant, So if you see these four events that actually unfolded before him, right, what does that actually remind you? I mean, like in the case of our uh, Gautama Buddha, right? When he was a bodhisatta, you remember, and in many of the Sunday school materials, or literature, right? Inevitably, you read, yeah, the students will actually read that, oh, the prince, the bodhisatta, this Gautama Buddha, when there's a bodhisatta, as a prince, he actually, he asked the charioteer, and asked the charioteer to drive him to the city, and in the city he actually saw these four scenes, these four events. He actually experienced the four events, and because of that, then the thought of renunciation actually then took firm hold in him, and then he shaved his beard, and put on a ochre robe, while his parents were weeping. Remember, in the Sunday school, reading materials, um, if you read the suttas, actually, in the suttas, this Gautama Buddha, right, actually never witnessed the four events, like what was described here, The Bodhisatta, if you read the suttas, the Bodhisattas actually contemplated on this, and then he became quite resolute, to actually to renounce, and to go forth, from the home life into the homeless life, but he never actually witnessed any of these four events, that actually were described in this DN14, um, so actually, if you look at this, somehow these events, from this Buddha Vipassi, actually were somehow transposed, into Gautama Buddha, to make it in a way more inspiring, and also more in a way, um, more interesting, for the Sunday Dhamma school students, But actually, if you look at it, these four events actually happened in the life of Vipassi Buddha, and this was like 91 eons ago, So it's actually a very long time ago. But if you read the suttas, these four events actually are applicable, only for Vipassi Buddha, but they were never actually mentioned in Gautama Buddha, the act in the suttas which explains how he actually made the resolve to renounce the world and became an ascetic, right? At the time, when his parents were weeping, he actually left. In fact, the suttas never actually described him as a prince, and a king. If you look at it, actually, it wasn't even the setting of a palace. If you read the suttas, so maybe that's something that we maybe need to also revise our Sunday school materials, so that it's actually more in line with the suttas, But But you can see that these four events are actually events that only unfolded for the case of Buddha Vipassi 91 eons ago. But for Gautama Buddha, that's actually not the case, but somehow they were actually transposed into our Sunday school reading materials, perhaps for inspiration, and also perhaps for faith, stronger faith to take hold among the students as well, but then again, um, if you actually look at the four events, these are actually very inspiring and very, um, they serve, as wake up calls to us, that, that life is actually not a bed of roses. So, you need to actually, um, see, the ultimate truth for yourself, and to see the ultimate truth, you must actually see, the, the actual, dukkha, that, the life, is actually intrinsically is, that's where, uh, when you actually encounter upon, say, dukkha, in many ways in your daily life, or if you happen to see somebody who is in great suffering, you have to actually start to contemplate this, you know, um, uh, from the spiritual standpoint, from the Dhamma standpoint, that, firstly, that you have to think, that the Buddha actually describes the samsara, as an inconceivable beginning and inconceivable end. Remember, the length of samsara. How long has it been? One one grain of sand on the Ganges River is actually one aeon. And how long you've been in samsara actually is more than the grains of sand on Ganges River. That's really, really scary, if you ask me. It's really scary, It's how long we have been, One grain is actually one aeon, and how many grains of sand there are, and how long we've been here is actually more than the grains of sand in Ganges River. So we have been to the woeful plains many, many times. We have forgotten about it, We have suffered a lot, and somehow, when we come back to the human realm, we forget about this and we continue, to perform a lot of unwholesome deeds. So when you see somebody who's in great danger or great suffering, like perhaps somebody who is beset with misfortune, or down with diseases, or or death, or wallowing in the urine and feces, a sick person, an old person, you must actually contemplate when you see this, that you know I've actually been through this before, in this samsara, and I must make sure I do not actually continue this any further. You should feel very um um you should feel very tired, you should feel very exhausted, by this, that you should feel that spiritually very, very concerned. It should be like a wake up call for you that you shouldn't actually continue this any further, and you must continue. You must, make sure that you continue to apply efforts to practice the Dhamma, and to always contemplate, you know, whenever any sense objects that come to your sense basis, must always that what the Buddha says, you must practice this kaya gata sati, which means how your mind reacts to these sense objects. Does it react with um, greed, attachment? Does it require? Does it react with aversion or hatred, or is there actually delusion? In what I actually contemplate. So if you actually see any of this, the Buddha says that you must then uh, uh, if it actually causes any reactions in you, which are unwholesome, you must apply samatha vipassana, to actually compose yourself first, and thereafter apply, the vipassana, to to see how this arise through causes and conditions. That's where you're able to see the ultimate uh you know intrinsic nature of conditioned phenomena, how these arise through causes and conditions, which lead you to then being able to penetrate the light of the Dhamma and be able to realize that ultimately all these conditioned phenomena arise through causes and conditions. They are sankharas, and because of this, there's actually no permanent unchanging self to it, and there's nothing to hold on to. Ultimately it will be subject to the whatever that arises must subject to cessation. And because of this, it is all empty. Sunyata. There's really nothing worth for you to hold on to. That's where you start to then have this passion, and this enchantment, the nibbida, in you, and that's where you start to let go, in gradually. That's where you ascend yourself spiritually upwards, from the Deva realms all the way to the Brahma realms, because you become lighter, as you're able to let go more, you're able to actually uplift yourself more and more spiritually, up, and ultimately, you attain this fruition, of Sotapatti, Sakadagami, Anagami, Arhanship. That's where you become totally and shackle yourself, from these D1 realms, and out from samsara altogether, and that is the ultimate happiness that the Buddha actually, refers to, which is this nibbana, uh, uh, it is the ultimate happiness, where, that's where, where there shall be no more birth, where what this Prince Vipassi Bodhisattva actually then contemplates because of this birth, that's why we're always suffering. But how do you then make sure that birth doesn't happen, that's where the next part of the sutta will come in, as to how this Prince Vipassi, contemplate from birth, what are the steps before birth? Which are the culprits before earth? He's going to contemplate this before, in the next chapter of the sutta, which I'll cover, in part 4 of the sutta. I know this sutta is very long. I will cover this in part 4 of the Dhamma discussion again. But today I'm just going to highlight to you about the 4 events that are unfolded before him, and how this seed of renunciation, and going forth into homelessness, this how it actually, takes firm hold in the Bodhisattva after seeing this 4 events, this 4 phenomena, which is quite remarkable, because of the great deeds that has happened, that he has done. That's why everything somehow will gravitate him towards this, for him to to actually rediscover, the path to liberation. That's what really is so remarkable about this sutta. So in the next part of the Dhamma discussion, I will then discuss about how this Prince Vipassi, then decides to go forth, and also how he reflects and how he actually contemplates until he becomes Sama Sambuddha. And of course, we'll compare how he cultivates himself under the tree. Of course, it's not the Bodhi tree for the Prince the Vipassi Buddha. He attains full enlightenment under a different tree, but under the tree, how did he contemplate? Is it similar to what Buddha Gautama actually contemplates? That actually culminates, in both the bodhisattvas, becoming Sama Sambuddhas. Is there a common thread? So that will also give us, a guidance as to how we should meditate, right? So that we are actually on the same track, like what the Buddha actually meditated and contemplated, so that we can also be like the Buddha, go step by step, and then finally reach the final liberation and the final realization, final awakening, and so that part, I will cover in the next part of the sutta discussion, in the next coming Dhamma discussion. So thank you very much for your kind attention. And I'll now pass forward back to Brother Terence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Balu, for today's Dhamma sharing. Now, let us dedicate those merits that accrue to all beings, whether they are seen or unseen. Akasatha cha Bhummata Devanaga Mahiddhika Punyang Tamanamoditva Chiram Rakkantu Loka Sasanang Ettavata cha Anghehi Sampadang Punya Sampadang Sabbe Deva Sabbe Bhuta Sabbe Satta Numodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Idang me nyati nang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Idang me nyati nang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Idang me nyati nang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. And aspirations. Imina punya kammena mame bala samagamo Satang samagamo hotu yawa nibbana pattiya. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you everyone for watching. For other videos, please visit the links below. Bye bye for now. See you all again soon.